On board the ship, every crew member had to take turns cooking, as it was the custom of traders to not have designated cooks. The messmates drew lots to pick who would be the cook each day. Additionally, all the shipmates had to drink together, using a tub with a lid that stood near the mast. Upon reaching the Caspian Sea without any major mishaps, the crew had a joyful celebration. Ulf, their expert navigator, received numerous praises for his skillful piloting. However, the most challenging part of their journey still lay ahead, crossing the Caspian and ascending the Oxus River to reach the Persian shores. Before embarking on the second leg of their voyage, the ships were drawn ashore, cleaned, repaired, and painted, as their bottoms had become foul. During the hiatus, the Vikings spent much of their time participating in athletic games. These exercises were very important and were never to be neglected. Once the ships were ready, they crossed the Caspian without facing any dangerous storms or shoals that often plagued mariners in the shallow sea. Upon landing, they were surprised by the people they met. They were strikingly different from the Vikings. The locals worshipped the sun and fire, wore large turbans similar to the Turks of today, and were highly industrious. Many of them led a nomadic life with their herds. The women were stunning, and the men courteous and hospitable. The Vikings bought many luxurious items such as velvet, which they called pell, richly embroidered cloth with gold and silver, brocades and superb linen tablecloths and napkins. The next leg of their journey involved ascending the Oxus River, which proved tiresome due to the strong current against them. Nevertheless, no one disturbed them. Everyone was eager to engage in trade with them, and they willingly participated by purchasing silk goods and velvets. They spent the beginning of winter on the river, and the later months on the Caspian. From there they sailed and rowed up the Volga before the snow and ice in the north melted and swelled the stream, making the current rapid. By the time this happened, they had already traveled far up the river. They waited patiently, passing their time playing games aboard their ships, waiting for the river to recede to its normal level. The Viking men were known for their love of gambling, so many of them spent their days rolling dice or strategizing over a game of chess. The journey north was arduous, requiring 3 men to man each oar due to the strong current. Despite the challenges, they arrived back in the Baltic in late September with their ships laden with valuable goods. The crew was overjoyed to be reunited with their loved ones, having had no casualties during their travels. Gunnar, in particular, was in high spirits. He presented his father with casks of wine and precious items, and his mother with luxurious fabrics. Gunnar had quickly gained a reputation as a brave and capable warrior, his accomplishments recounted by bards and poets in the great halls of the land's lords. He was known for his maturity and tact beyond his years, and many said he was a mirror image of his father. At this point in his life, his parents began to consider finding a suitable wife for him. One day, Sverrir summoned Gunnar and shared a story with him that he had heard of Frey, a Viking god who had foolishly taken Odin's sacred seat and glimpsed a vision of a beautiful woman. This woman, Gerd, was the daughter of the wealthy Gymir and Orboda, renowned for her unparalleled beauty. Frey's infatuation with her was so intense that he became consumed by it, ceasing to speak, eat, or drink. Sverrir wanted his son to hear the story as he believed it held a valuable lesson. Njord summoned Skirnir, Frey's attendant, and instructed him to ask Frey why he was so upset and avoiding company. Skirnir was reluctant but went to Frey and asked him about his sorrow. Frey revealed that he had seen a beautiful woman and was pining for her. He ordered Skirnir to go and propose to her for marriage, regardless of her father's consent. In return, he promised Skirnir a handsome reward. Skirnir, however, only agreed to do it if Frey gave him his sword, which fought on its own. Frey gave him the sword, and Skirnir set out to convince the woman Gerd to marry Frey. After 3 days, Gerd agreed to marry Frey. After narrating this tale, Sverrir told his son Gunnar that from Damstadir, towards the west, he could see beautiful maidens, the 3 daughters of Stenar, the Hreidar of Fylkir. He suggested that Gunnar, who was then already of marriageable age, consider them as potential brides. Sverrir emphasized that their beauty and accomplishments were widely known in the northern lands. Marrying one of the daughters would be an advantage to their family and bring them closer to the Hreidar of Fylkir. Gunnar responded to his father, acknowledging his concern for his well-being but reminding him that the daughters of Stenar held the most prestigious lineage in all of the northern lands. He worried that their ambition may not fit within the limits of Hrafan's realm, and they may seek suitors with more wealth than he possessed. Gunnar suggested that it may be better if he first obtains greater renown before a making proposal, as it would allow him to secure a more advantageous match. His father assured him that their shared lineage to Odin was enough to make a suitable union, but the conversation ended there. Despite pondering Sverrir's remarks about finding him a happy and honorable match, Gunnar left the issue of his marriage in his father's hands. He knew that a marriage alliance between their families would be highly advantageous and pleasing to his parents, especially considering their friendship with Steinar. Chapter 14. Erling's Burning Journey to Valhalla. After their journey to the Caspian, the Raudasandur brothers returned to a land in chaos. Vikings from distant shores had swooped in with their armadas, pillaging and plundering at will. The people suffered, peace was gone, and the invaders seemed invincible. Among them were the infamous brothers Erling and Hagbard, with their fleet of swift and powerful ships bearing grey sails and painted to blend into the horizon. They were Vikings of legend, landless and nomadic. These men never slept beneath a roof or drank by a warm hearth. Their warriors were berserks, prone to fits of bloody madness, and they revelled in raiding the shores and amassing gold and treasure. Erling had a dozen champions at his side, among them the old and wise Vigrid and the brave Ulf. These were not men to die in their beds. These warriors had pledged to meet their end in battle, fighting to the last breath. Such was the way of their kin, including Erling's father, who too had slept beneath the stars. Erling himself was a fearsome warrior, agile and strong, and who struck fear into the hearts of his foes. Wintering in the rivers and defying the power of Rome and the Herseers, Erling and Hagbard continued their campaign of plunder and raiding, always staying one step ahead of their pursuers. They took new ships as their old ones wore down, never resting as they sought adventure and riches. But even these famous brothers knew when their luck had run out. Now, tired of the western lands and facing being declared outlaws by every thing or assembly, they decided to return to their homeland, bitter but undefeated. Erling, a fierce warrior, joined his host without warning, and together they faced off against Thorkel, a notorious Hreidar known for blatantly disregarding the laws of war. Thorkel barely had enough time to gather his own men, which included the renowned brothers Svidpad and Gegad, before the two sides engaged in a brutal battle. Valhalla claimed many souls that day. Amid the fighting, Svidpad and Gegad made a furious charge towards Erling's men and left many of them lying lifeless on the ground. Erling's champions were badly wounded and unable to fight, weakened by their loss of blood. But Erling himself would not back down. He charged forward and shattered Thorkel's shieldberg, slaying Thorkel, his standard-bearer, and even Svidpad and Gegad. In triumph, Erling claimed the land and became ruler of Thorkel's Herod. Erling spent the winter at home, ruling over his newly conquered land. But his champions were restless and eager for adventure, so they set sail for the southern lands on Viking expeditions, returning home with great wealth. Eric and Jorund were among the Vikings who never lived under a roof or by a fireside, for they were always seeking adventure and battle. After slaying the Hreidar of Gotaland, they sought to avenge the disgrace put upon their kinsman Thorkel by challenging Erling and Hagbard. When they learned that Erling had allowed his champions to go on expeditions, they called upon a large host to reconquer Thorkel's land. People from all around joined their cause, and soon a mighty battle erupted. For a long time, neither side seemed to be winning. Champions fought against champions until finally Erling charged forward with such ferocity that he slew all those who stood before him. Among them was Eirik, along with the standard-bearers of the brothers, while Jorund and his men fled to their ships in defeat. Erling lay wounded, knowing his days were numbered. He had prepared a ship of great value, prized for its speed, beauty, and strength in battle. Laden with the bodies of high-born warriors fallen in battle, their weapons, and an immense pyre of tarred wood, he bid farewell to his followers. Erling announced he was going to Odin and commanded his men to carry him aboard the ship, in full war dress, complete with chain armor, helmet, sword, and shield. They built a large pyre near the prow and set him upon it. With the rudder adjusted and the sail hoisted, the burning ship set off. Much gold and weapons were placed on board, and the tarred wood was kindled. As the wind blew the ship seaward, the burning vessels sailed away. The warriors bade Erling and his men a happy journey to Valhalla. The funeral pyre sailed on, the flames rising higher and higher towards the sky. The sail burned, and finally the mast, resplendent like a tower of fire, fell upon the deck. People believed that the higher the flames rose, the greater the welcome in Valhalla would be. Then the flames became less bright, and eventually went out. All of a sudden, the ship sunk into the deep, signifying that Erling and his warriors had sailed to Valhalla. The people sang a song that spoke of how this great deed of Erling would echo through time and be celebrated by the skalds. Meanwhile, Gunnar and his brothers prepared their vessels to make war on the Viking raiders who caused turmoil and threatened the land. As they were launching the ships, Ingun's ship came down the rollers, striking and killing one man. Launching ships was always a hazardous endeavor, especially if not done with due care. In those days, a dreadful occurrence was known as roller reddening. It was considered a terrible omen, causing many to cancel their intended expeditions. Gunnar and his Raudasandur brothers believed that faithless family spirits wished them harm, and had abandoned their watch over them. The following day, Gunnar and Ingun were walking together when Gunnar spotted a familiar pet goat lying in a hollow place in the courtyard. The goat appeared to be covered in blood. Ingun, startled, informed Gunnar that there was no goat there. This revelation made Gunnar worry that he was a death-fated man, and that the spirit that followed and protected him was warning him of danger. If not him, then perhaps one of his kinsmen would die. Ingun advised him to be vigilant, and the others, including Sigbrit and Sigmund, offered to watch over him. However, Gunnar knew that fate was unchangeable. If he was meant to die, then there was no avoiding it. He resolved to face his fate bravely. After 2 successive omens which made a deep impression on Gunnar, he decided to cancel their expedition. The ships were dragged ashore and put under the sheds, and it was announced that no expeditions were to take place that year. Then Gunnar offered a special sacrifice to Frey, whom he loved more than all the other gods. He offered 4 black oxen and 2 of his most valuable horses. Ingun suggested that they consult the oracles to find out the decrees of fate, as he did not like the roller reddening that occurred during the launching of their ships, or the vision of the bloody goat. He feared that something terrible was going to happen. Thus they sacrificed again, and the answer was that Gunnar would not die but must remain at home that year, and a kinsman very dear to him would be killed in battle. The following summer, Gunnar made the LED ready and sailed for Norway. However, during their journey, while in the Kattegat, they encountered headwinds and were forced to stay on an island. They threw the sacrificial chips to get fair winds, and the answer was that Odin was to receive one man out of their host before a fair wind would come. They sailed towards the coast and landed near a great sacrifice ring with a huge stone altar. This was where people made human sacrifices and broke the backs of men to give to Odin. The oracles had designated Agnar as the man to be sacrificed. Thus they broke his back and offered him to Odin. They then smeared the altar with his blood, returned to their ships, and sailed away with a fair wind. The sacrificing ring has a sacrificial boulder at the center and is surrounded by a ring composed of 11 stones. It stands to this day in the province of Bohuslän near Blomholm. Chapter 15. Death and Burning of Sverrir. The warnings of the bad omens were not heeded, and the fateful sea battle between Sverrir and Hreidar began. The clash of swords and spears echoed across the waves as men fought bravely for their cause. The Norsemen called it the whirlwind of Hedin, and indeed it lived up to its name. Blood poured forth from wounds and soaked the armor, whilst broken swords and shields were scattered across the deck. The battle raged on, taking many lives and sending them towards Valhalla. Amidst the chaos, Sverrir saw a vision of the Valkyria Skogul, who proclaimed that the elect of Odin were on their way to Valhalla. Hedin himself appeared alongside Skogul and Gondul, armed and armored, their hair flowing behind them as they rode on horseback. Sverrir knew that Odin had sent them to choose among the Ynglingar kin, who would join them in Valhalla. With renewed vigor, Sverrir fought on under his war standard, clad in his helmet and chain armor. His sword cut through the chainmail like water, painting the ships a deep shade of red with the blood of his enemies. The battle raged on, with spears and arrows flying all around him. The play of the Hedin grew fiercer and hotter with each passing moment. Suddenly, Sverrir saw a vision of Skuld, the Norn who was about to sever the thread of his own life. At that moment, he knew that his end was near. Odin guided a spear towards him, and Sverrir received his fateful wound, proving true the warnings that had earlier been given. The sea battle ended with many souls departing for the halls of Valhalla. The next morning, Sverrir lay on the deck of his ship, surrounded by the corpses of many valiant champions slain in battle. In his fevered delirium, he cried out to Skogul, goddess of war, questioning why the gods had not granted them victory. Skogul's voice seemed to echo in his mind, telling him that they had prevailed. Their enemies had fled, and they had triumphed on the battlefield. But then, as Sverrir's life ebbed away, he heard the voice of Odin, the All-Father, calling out to his valiant warriors. Odin beckoned to Hermod and Bragi, bidding them to go forth and welcome Sverrir to the halls of Valhalla. And as Sverrir dreamed of his glorious entrance into the afterlife, he heard Odin's words of praise ringing in his ears. "Welcome, Sverrir," the god exclaimed. "You have fought bravely and wisely, and have been a faithful servant of the gods. You shall have peace and joy in our halls, and our maidens, the Hedin, shall serve you well. You have earned your place among the chosen." Even as Sverrir slipped away from the world of the living, he continued to speak, urging his wife Sigurlin to make sure that his burial was worthy of a great Inglingar chief. He instructed her to build a wide and lofty mound over his remains, and to furnish it with all the weapons and armor that he and his fallen warriors might need in the afterlife. He asked for many horses to be sacrificed and burned with him, as well as his beloved hawks. He called for fine garments and riding gear to be laid to rest with him, along with ample supplies of gold and silver. All of this, he knew, would ensure that the gates of Valhalla would be opened for him, and that he and his warriors would be welcomed into the company of the gods. Even in death, Sverrir remained a warrior at heart, ready to do battle with any foe who might cross his path. "Our journey will not be one of poverty, as the wealth we have accumulated in our lifetime will accompany us to the end. And place beside me the sharp sword that once lay between us before we were wed, back when I courted you. It protected your holy person and guarded your honor." These were his final words, spoken moments before his passing. As was customary, his eyes and mouth were closed, his nostrils pinched, his body and head washed, and his hair combed. The people claimed that Odin himself had guided Sverrir's ship during the battle. Gunnar was absent from the fleet when his father met his demise in combat, nor was he home. It wasn't until 2 days later, upon his return to Dampstadir, that he learned of his father's death. He left his ships on the opposite side of the island due to unfavorable winds and rode across the country to reach his destination. When he arrived at the great hall, he took his customary place on the high seat and immediately noticed the wall hangings. His mother had draped the hall in mournful black and grey as a sign of mourning, and indeed the hangings conveyed the immense sorrow and loss Hrafn had suffered. Through this, Gunnar knew something terrible had happened to his kinsman, and his face immediately displayed deep concern. His mother appeared shortly afterward and sat down beside him. Gunnar examined her closely, noticing the pallor on her face. "Mother," he said, "did you order the hall draped in such a manner? Tell me who these tokens of mourning are for." Sigurlin replied, "Your father, the Hreidar of Hrafn, is no more. Sverrir, your father, is dead, but he fell gloriously in the midst of victory." "The tokens of death have come true," said Gunnar, his voice heavy with grief. "The sacrificial chips foretold this. A man fated for death cannot be saved. Anything and everything is dangerous for one with such a fate. A man who is not fated for death cannot be mortally wounded. He will find a way to escape. But the one who is fated for death will meet their end on the appointed day. The decrees of the Nornir at my father's birth had to be fulfilled." Sigurlin, widowed and heartsick, did not give in to tears, nor did she cry out or lament as women often do. Wise men tried to console her, but their words did not ease her pain. Despite her inability to weep, her sorrow was profound, and her heart shattered. High-born brides of mighty chiefs and warriors sat beside her, adorned in gold, trying to comfort her. Each shared tales of their own bitter sorrows. Juki's sister spoke first. "No woman on earth has suffered a lack of love as I have. I have lost 2 husbands, 3 daughters, 8 brothers, and 4 sisters, and yet I still live." Even this did not bring tears to Sigurlin's eyes. Herborg spoke next. "My sorrow is even greater. My 7 sons and my husband fell among the dead in the southern lands. Aegir's brother, the wind, and Ingrid's 9 daughters played with my parents and 4 brothers on the sea. Their ship struck the gunwale and they were killed. I had to wash, dress, handle, and bury their bodies alone. I endured it all in 1 year, and no one came to my aid. The same year, I became a bondwoman. Every morning I had to dress and tie the wife of Hreidar's shoes. She was jealous and struck me with forceful blows. I never found a better housemaster, nor a worse housewife." Still, Sigurlin could not weep. Gulrond stared at them before speaking, her voice measured and steady. "Little comfort can you give by speaking as you have done to Sigurlin, wise though you are." With a deliberate motion she motioned for them to uncover the body of Sverrir. They obeyed, revealing his still form to the group. Without hesitation, Gulrond drew the sheet from the body and tossed it to the ground at Sigurlin's feet. "Look on your beloved husband. Put your mouth to his now silent lips as you would whenever you embraced him," Gulrond instructed. Sigurlinn gazed upon her husband, taking in the wound on his breast, his unmoving lips, ears and eyes, his arms still and unresponsive. His cheeks were pale, and his life was gone. At the sight, she broke down completely, crumpling onto the pillow where Sverrir's head rested. Her cheeks flushed with colour as a tear slipped down her hair and upon her knee. Sorrow radiated from her eyes, and she was inconsolable. For Sigurlinn, there would be no peace until she had fully mourned her loss. 5 days later, after the death of Sverrir, the funeral procession took place. The custom of the land was to lay the deceased beneath a mound within 5 days of their passing. The people believed Odin had created this law, much like the Aesir of olden times. They believed the dead should be burned, and their property placed on the pyre with them. The amount of wealth burned with the dead determined their status in Valhalla. They were also allowed to keep and use what they had buried in the ground. Their remains could be thrown into the sea or buried in the earth, and those who had distinguished themselves would have a memorial stone erected in their honor. It had been decided by Gunnar and his kin that Sverrir would be burned on a ship ashore, rather than sent out to sea. A fine skuta of 15 adorned benches was chosen for the pyre. In keeping with tradition, their powerful warships were never used during funeral proceedings. The skuta stood tall as if it were afloat on the open sea. Its sturdy prow pointed towards the horizon, beckoning towards adventure. Surrounding the vessel was an abundance of tarred wood, making it seem like a fortress on the waves. In the front of the ship lay the resting place of Sverrir, elegantly built to honor his valor and bravery. When everything was in place, Sverrir's body was tenderly laid upon his bed. He was garbed in war attire, donning a helmet, chain armor, a sword, and a shield. Spears were placed at his side, and his golden spurs rested at his feet. It was as if he were ready to head into battle. Gunnar brought forth his own horse, adorned in splendid regalia. Following him was a majestic four-wheeled carriage, lavishly decorated and pulled by a team of 12 powerful horses. The carriage and horses were sacrificed and thrown upon the pyre, dedicating them to Sverrir's journey. As the flames were ignited, Gunnar wished Sverrir a safe passage to Valhalla by either sea, horseback, or carriage. All those gathered expressed their admiration for Sverrir, and hoped he would welcome them when they too met their fate. They honored him with a multitude of gifts, casting priceless treasures, golden chains, and silver trinkets into the flames. Even his personal belongings that he had amassed throughout his life were offered up. Ancient custom dictated that all the weapons that were to follow Sverrir to Valhalla should no longer be of any use. Thus the swords and spearheads were bent and blunted, shields were torn apart, and shield bosses were shattered. Even Roman and Greek artifacts were broken partially, and their coins were tossed into the ship. The scene was awe-inspiring as the flames turned the night sky into a brilliant display of reds, oranges, and yellows. As the blaze died down, the sounds of the crackling wood faded away until there was only the glow of the embers remaining. In solemn silence, the charred remains of Sverrir were collected and placed in a beautiful Roman bronze vessel, along with precious Roman coins from the time of Diocletian, the spear point that caused his fatal wound, draftsman belonging to his chessboard, and 2 dice. The lid to the vase was made up of 12 shield bosses, their convex side carefully placed downward over the remains, with a bent sword strategically placed above. Once the urn was prepared, it was put into the mortuary chamber. Over the course of several days, a cairn was built over Sverrir's remains, and a large memorial stone adorned with a runic inscription was placed on top of the monument to commemorate his life. A few days later, his ashes were scattered to the wind, falling into the endless expanse of the sea. With that, Sverrir, the Hreidar of Hrafn, passed on to Valhalla. Mourning such a loss is never easy. Gunnar solemnly said to his Raudasandur brother Ingun, "It's been said that Odin has decreed that the wealth of man, his gold, silver, and movable property, should accompany him on his burning journey. This way, he remains generous and kind during life, giving away his wealth and avoiding a hardened heart. Hersirs and prominent men must never be miserly. The wealth given in life will be given back to them in Valhalla." Pausing to collect his thoughts, Gunnar added, "I've often pondered what might have been if my first cousin Halbjorn, son of Halfdan, had lived. He would have become the Hreidar of Hrafn instead of my father, and I would not be ruler over the sacrifices. The decrees of the Nornir are truly mysterious." Chapter 16. Halbjorn and the Hedin. Gunnar had mentioned Halbjorn before, as his father often spoke of his deceased brother. However, this narrative had not previously referred to Halbjorn, as he had been dead for many years. Halfdan had fallen deeply in love with Thurid, the beautiful daughter of Hreidar of Zealand, whom he married. Sadly, Thurid died a year after their marriage while giving birth to their son. Halfdan was so heartbroken that he ordered his newborn son to be abandoned, the very child who had caused him so much pain. The baby was placed in a cradle with a piece of pork in his mouth and left in a forest near Dampstadir, where he could die easily but be protected from the weather. As water had not been poured on him, he was not given a name. Some time after the baby was abandoned, Sverrir's uncle was passing through the wooded area and heard the infant's cries. He followed the sound and was moved by the pitiful sight he saw. Full of compassion, he took the baby to his estate, where his sister cared for him and loved him deeply. Halfdan could not bring himself to marry again, for he loved Thurid far too much. In his eyes, no other woman could ever compare to her. His love and memories of her remained with him until his death. He even uttered her name as his last words. As the abandoned child grew, he became a stunningly handsome boy. However, he was born unable to speak, and his uncle believed the Nornir had fated him to remain mute. He began to think that it would have been better to have left the child exposed. But one day, while the boy sat on a mound, he saw something that changed everything. He saw 9 Hedin in the sky, riding toward him, their helmets and chain armors shining in the light. They held glittering spears in their hands, and the boy was in awe. One of the Valkyries riding high above looked down and saw the young boy. Instantly she knew him to be something special, and began to sing, "Your name shall be Halbjorn. You will rule over vast riches on the plains of Rodalsvellir in far-off lands." As soon as the song ended, Halbjorn spoke. Years passed, and Halbjorn grew up to be a great warrior. He left his birthplace and kin to travel to foreign lands on warlike expeditions. Nobody was surprised by his absence, as it was common for warriors to conquer far-off realms and settle there or perish. As time went on, people began to sing about Halbjorn and his life. They believed that he was given his name by a Valkyrie named Bodvild, who was the daughter of a ruler in the southern lands. Bodvild was thought to be a Valkyrie who would come among men and become like other women. People believed that she was a reincarnation of Svafa, the daughter of a great ruler in the north, and who, they believed, led a life similar to Bodvild. The story of Halbjorn's life was impressive, and people spoke of him for years. It was said that he came to Hrafen after searching for new lands to conquer. Orvar, a powerful ruler who lived at Svaringshaug, had many sons, and among them were Gunnar, Gudmund, Vigrid, and Hogni. Hodbrod went to a meeting of Hersirs, and he became engaged to Bodvild, with her father Hogni's acceptance. Bodvild, however, was unaware of the agreement, as was common for women who owned or had rights to any entailed land. When Bodvild learned of her betrothal, she was heartbroken because she loved Halbjorn and was planning to marry him. She and Hedin took on different forms and travelled across land and sea to search for Halbjorn. Bodvild found Halbjorn fighting the sons of Hunding at the Loga Mountains, where he had just defeated Alf, Eyjolf, and Hervard. Bodvild embraced Halbjorn and told him of her situation. Halbjorn's thoughts were on the war, but he was immediately enchanted by Bodvild and proclaimed that he loved her. Bodvild was devoted to Halbjorn and had chosen him as her chief above all others. The two then made a betrothal pact, triggering a war against Halbjorn declared by Hogni and his clan, with Hodbrod joining in alongside his sons. Halbjorn set out with a mighty fleet and headed for Freckestein, the appointed battleground. But as they departed from shore, a fierce tempest descended upon them. Thunder roared, lightning crackled and struck the ships, and the waves tossed and churned. The sailors struggled to keep the vessels afloat, preparing themselves for the onslaught of Ingrid and her forces. The sea-god Aegir and his brother the Wind were in a malevolent mood. Ingrid's daughters besieged the fleet, pummeling them mercilessly. But amidst the chaos, Halbjorn caught sight of a wondrous sight, the Nornir, Odin's maidens, riding through the skies. They were led by Skuld, the youngest and most beautiful, followed by Bodvild, with a helmet on her head and her hair streaming behind her as she charged forward on her steed. Suddenly the storm ceased, and Halbjorn felt that Bodvild had come to protect him. The fleet sailed on, hugging the shoreline until they reached Freckestein, backed by the towering Loga Mountains. As they approached, Gudmund, one of the sons of Orvar, and a land defender named Egil, spied them from afar. Gudmund called out, demanding to know the identity of the leader of the ship with the gold-embroidered battle flag. He sensed that they were not peaceful folk. Egil identified Halbjorn as the one holding the Fjorsung's birthland, which he had taken from their kin. Gudmund quickly returned home to deliver the news of the impending war. All the sons of Orvar rallied together, creating a formidable army. Many other great chiefs joined them. Hogni, the father of Bodvild, came with his sons Bragi and Dag and their ally Hodbrod. The stage was set for a fierce battle. The warring factions converged at the designated battlefield, marked by wooden stakes driven deep into the earth. The clash of arms erupted with a cacophony of sounds as swords and spears met in a deadly dance. Helms were split asunder, shields shattered, and warriors fought with a ferocity born of an unquenchable thirst for glory. In the distance, the Loga Mountains cast glimmering rays of light across the bloody field of battle. Amidst the chaos, Hedin, clad in chainmail and helmet, rode like a spectre over the battlefield. His spear flashed with each thrust, and the blood of his enemies stained his armor. As the day drew to a close, Bodvild brought a temporary end to the fighting by imploring her companions to lay down their arms. Halbjorn, the victor, extended an invitation to the Hedin to join him for a celebratory feast, yet Bodvild knew her duty lay elsewhere. She and her companions departed, leaving Halbjorn to contemplate his triumph alone. The morning brought a renewed wave of violence, culminating in the death of all the sons of Orvar, save for Dag, the brother of Bodvild. At the hands of Halbjorn, a bloody massacre ensued, with the wolves and ravens gathering to feast upon the corpses. In the aftermath of the slaughter, Bodvild made her way among the dead, her voice ringing out in a haunting song that spoke of Hodbrod's demise. She encountered Halbjorn, now mortally wounded, and listened as he acknowledged the power of the Nornir over the fates of men. In the end, Dag mustered the strength to finish off Halbjorn, avenging his fallen brothers and ensuring that the vanquished foe would never rise again. Dag rode through the Seva Mountains, his horse struggling through the dense terrain. He found Bodvild and broke the news regretfully. "Sister, I am pained to tell you. The man who had conquered Fjorturland, the man who stood with his foot on the neck of many chiefs who had to pay him tribute, has fallen this morning." Bodvild was consumed with grief when she heard the sorrowful tidings. Overwhelmed with emotions, she flew into a rage and cursed her brother. "May the river Leiptir and the sea swallow you whole. The wind will not guide your ship, nor will your horse bear you fast. The sword in your hand will not bite until it snarls over your own head. I hope you suffer worse than outlaws, hiding in the forest with no sustenance until the death of Halbjorn is avenged." Suppressing his shock, Dag replied, "You are beside yourself, sister. You insult your own family and defile the name of Odin. Odin alone causes strife among kinsmen." Desperate to make amends, Dag offered to compensate his sister by giving her half his land, a temple and huge estates, and a large amount of gold. Heartbroken and consumed with sorrow, Bodvild refused to be indemnified for Halbjorn's death. In the end, Bodvild herself died early from the grief of losing her lover. With Halbjorn dead, the rule over Hrafen was handed down to Sverrir. Chapter 17. The Inheritance Feast of Sverrir. After his father's death, Gunnar could not immediately inherit the title of Hreidar of Hrafen. The assembly of people, known as the Thing, had to approve him as their leader because no one could govern without their consent. Even though the position was hereditary, the Thingmen had the power to remove a man from his position if necessary. The laws applied to him just as they did to the common people, and the most powerful entity in the land was the Thing. To become the Hreidar and the High Priest of Hrafen, Gunnar first had to make a sacrifice before the people. In accordance with ancient customs, he killed a ram and anointed himself with its blood before declaring himself the godship of Sverrir. After the ceremony, he would oversee all sacrifices performed in Dampstadir. Gunnar waited at home for his father's inheritance feast, known as the Arvel, to take place before assuming the position of Hreidar. According to tradition, the feast had to be held within the same year that the person for whom it is being celebrated passed away. The inheritor could not take the high seat until the Arvel was drunk. As Sverrir was of Odin's family and a powerful Hreidar, the feast was expected to be grand. Gunnar sent ships and messengers far and wide to invite high-born men and kinsmen to come and pay homage to Sverrir. The high seat of Sverrir had to remain unoccupied until the Arvel was drunk, as decreed by ancient laws. As the warriors gathered in the hall for the feast, the empty high seat reminded them of their absent friend. They reminisced about drinking and fighting with him on numerous occasions, and how they emerged victorious. In the evenings, the skalds who had fought alongside Sverrir recounted his heroic deeds to the assembled guests, taking them back to the moments when they looked upon the contending foemen from the Shieldburg. In tales shared by the Dampstadir residents, champions fought to their death, both on land and at sea. Sverrir, a formidable Viking, had cleared the decks of 2 ships on separate occasions. Meanwhile, life in Dampstadir remained unchanged. Sigurlinn managed the estate while her son Gunnar oversaw the ship's maintenance and construction. The slaves carried out their duties, adorned in white woolen clothing and cropped hair, while free servants continued their work. Gunnar, a skilled farmer, also spent his time crafting swords and supervising shipbuilding. He enjoyed chess games with his father's aging defenders of the land, and also went hawking. Most of all, he savoured the view of the sea from Sverrir's mound, calling it the unseen path. One day, Gunnar sat with Ingunn on Hjovard's mound, deep in thought. He then shared with him some wise words. A man can find happiness in many things, like sons, wealth, or good deeds, but true happiness comes from blending your thoughts with those of a good friend and being dependable. Don't be the first to leave your friends. It only brings sorrow. In my youth, I travelled and lost my way. Gunnar continued, As I met another man, I couldn't help but feel wealthy. There is a certain delight in the company of other men. A fir tree standing on a fenced field withers away with no shelter from bark or foliage. Similarly, a man with no love soon fades away. There is no reason for him to live a long life. Brand is kindled from brand, and fire is ignited by fire. A man gains knowledge through conversation with other men. It may be out of one's way to visit someone you dislike, even if they live nearby. On the other hand, a good friend is always close, even if they are far away. I've arrived at many places far too early and far too late to others. Either the ale was already drunk, or none had been brewed. An unwelcome man seldom finds the ale ready. A homestead is best, even if it is small. A man is at home as long as he has 2 goats and a straw-thatched house. From here we can contemplate many humble dwellings where happiness and joy are to be found, often more than in the halls of the wealthy. The fire and the sight of the sun are the greatest things among the sons of men, followed by good health and a blameless life, if one can keep them. Gunnar had taken great pains to make his father's Arvel more famous than any other. He had 2 large festive halls built to accommodate the vast number of guests who were coming. Nothing was spared to give widespread fame to the 2-week Arvel. Several great Hersers had pledged to attend and honour his father, Sverrir. The Hersers of Fylkir, Gardariki, Holmgard, Fien, and Zealand were among the guests. 2 weeks before the Arvel, guests from the farthest away began to arrive. They were determined to ensure nothing got in the way of their attendance. On the appointed day of the Arvel, all the guests were present, and the feast began in grand style. In the days of old, when Hersirs and high-born men passed on to the afterlife, it was customary to hold an Arvel ceremony. The one who offered it, and was to receive the inheritance, would step in front of the deceased's high seat until Bragi's horn, the horn of the gods, was brought in. Then he would stand up, take the horn, make a solemn oath, and drain it to the last drop. Finally, he would be led to the high seat of his kinsman, where he would become the rightful owner of his legacy. One such Arvel was held for Sverrir. In the presence of all the guests, Gunnar sat on the steps leading to his father's high seat. On the first night, they raised their horns to the memory of the departed. On the second night, they honoured Odin, Njord, Frey, and Bragi. With each vow, the atmosphere grew more solemn and awe-inspiring. Every prominent man swore to do something great that would be known all across the northern lands. Then came Gunnar's turn. He stood up and vowed to avenge his father's death within 2 years, or else die trying. By invoking the names of the gods, he swore to carry out his pledge. Then his kinsman led him to his rightful place in Sverrir's high seat. From that moment on, he was the rightful heir to his father's wealth and power. When the feast was over, Gunnar made generous to all the distinguished guests who had come to honour his father's memory. Even those who were not prominent received their share of the bounty, and everyone parted on the best of terms. They declared that it was the most splendid Arvel they had ever attended. But soon after, tragedy struck the family once again. While drinking with his men, Gunnar received news that his beloved uncle Ingemund had passed away suddenly. Ingemund's death caused great sorrow and dismay among all the people, because he was loved by the people, and they would go to him for wise counsel and his knowledge of the law. Though Gunnar mourned deeply for his uncle, he was determined to keep his vow and avenge his father's death. His word was his bond, and he would do whatever it took to carry out his noble purpose. The weight of sorrow lay heavy upon the people, for Ingemund had not taken his own life by leaping from a towering cliff, as was expected of warriors who had not been fated to die in battle. With his passing, he had missed his chance to ascend to Valhalla and sit with the gods. He had often spoken of his desire to have a glorious end, to die with honor rather than in the weakness of old age, as was the custom. It was said that those who died by their own hand showed that they were unafraid of death and were destined for greatness in the next life. Gunnar, along with the people of Dampstadir, travelled to the home of Ingemund to pay their respects. A grand mortuary chamber of sturdy timber was built, and a cairn was raised over it, leaving the entrance accessible. To prepare Ingemund for his journey to Hel, the realm of the dead who had not died in battle, the family asked Gunnar to perform the ritual of placing hell shoes on the feet of the departed. This was an ancient custom that had survived generations, and it was believed that it would aid Ingemund in his journey. They promised to adorn Ingemund with fine clothing, for it was said that those who dressed well for the afterlife were preparing themselves for hell. Gunnar agreed to their request and placed the hell shoes on Ingemund's feet. He tied them tightly and made sure that they would not come undone during the journey. This was crucial, for the hell shoes were said to guide the deceased to their final destination. The people present admired Gunnar's skill and attention to detail, assuring him that the journey to Hel would be free of trouble. Ingemund's body lay in the mortuary chamber, adorned in his finest war attire. His gold chain armor gleamed in the light, and atop his head was his helmet, a symbol of his bravery in battle. A magnificent shield, elaborately ornamented, was carefully placed on his chest, and his sword rested at his side. The warrior's wrists and arms were adorned with rings and bracelets of pure gold, a testament to his wealth and power. As he was laid to rest, beautiful Roman and Greek bronze vases were set at his feet and head. Greek cups of delicate glass and decorated with intricate paintings were placed alongside a Samian vase and a Roman sieve of gleaming bronze. A pair of golden tweezers and a finely crafted bone comb were also included among the offerings to the afterlife. And amongst these treasures lay several ancient coins, bearing the likeness of Diocletian, a powerful Roman emperor of long ago. As the mourners closed the chamber, they whispered prayers for Ingemund's safe journey to the land of the dead. And even now, any traveller who charts the eastern shores of Hrafn may spot Ingemund's mighty cairn, towering above the waves like a monument to his valor and glory. Chapter 18. Gunnar spurns Vigrid's indemnity. Vigrid had dealt the mortal blow to Sverrir, and he knew that Gunnar, Sverrir's son, would seek revenge for his father's death. He sought to make amends by offering weregild, or compensation, to Gunnar. He sent Nidud, a skilled warrior, to deliver the offer and invite Gunnar and his Raudasandur brothers to his hall to receive great rewards and reconciliation. Nidud arrived at the banqueting hall where the men were gathered around the fires, enjoying their mead, ale, and beer. As he entered, all fell silent, knowing that he brought important news. Gunnar invited Nidud to sit on the second high seat, and he began to speak of Vigrid's offer. With a chilling voice, he announced that Vigrid wished for Gunnar and his brothers to come to his hall to receive great rewards, including gold and silver, weapons, armor, horses, and estates. He promised indemnity for Sverrir's death and reconciliation, but Gunnar suspected that Vigrid had ulterior motives. He wondered if Vigrid had a wolf's mind, and simply meant to trick him into coming to his hall with only a few men so he could ambush them with overwhelming force. Gunnar proclaimed the wealth and strength that he and his brothers possessed. He boasted of their sharp swords, white brynjas, swift arrows, sure spears, and strong horses. Gunnar declared that they had no interest in whatever Vigrid had to offer, for their treasures were among the greatest in the northern lands. Nidud then handed Gunnar a stick, on which the message and invitation were written in mystic runes. Gunnar read it, and whispered to his Raudasandur brothers that he would not accept the offer or the indemnity.